Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing a Q&A exclusively on the topic of Guild Wars 2's potential expansion, Heart of Thorns. I've grabbed tons of questions from you guys. They have been flowing in like mad. Some things that I find interesting and some of the most common ones we've had. I will talk about nothing but Heart of Thorns, speculate on what exactly could be coming and what you guys are asking about. We may end up doing a few of these going forward, especially if, you know, we've got like a 6 months wait or so for the actual thing to drop. So let's get started. The first one comes from In the Desert Rain, who says, "Hey Wooden Potatoes, I had a thought that crossed my mind and I was wondering what you'd think of it. In a previous video you talked about Tyria, the planet, and showed us a map with all the locations on it. This is Tyria, the continent, QandA, Elona, the wetlands, and all those other places. Just so that you guys are aware, this was a video we did a few months ago, if anyone is returning for this whole expansion hype thing, where actually in a previous patch, a recent patch to the game, ArenaNet revealed a lot more about the entire world that we've ever seen before, and this included regions called the wetlands and so forth. So this person says, I was wondering, first, how big do you think this expansion will be? And secondly, if it's huge, like the first Guild Wars 2 release, meaning it will have to use a lot of zones, do you think that they will use another part of the planet like the wetlands? Maybe for some reason Morgemoth would escape to another continent in order to survive, and the best continent for him to be would be the wetlands, since he's living in a tropical kind of landscape. Do you think such a possibility could happen, or do you think we'll be stuck on the mainland?" It's a very interesting idea. I don't think that the wetlands, just because of their name, are particularly much more likely to be the site of an expansion. In all honesty, based on what we saw with that map, the circumstances of it's revealed, and just how non-specific a lot of those areas are titled, I don't think we're, in a matter of months, going to see ourselves travel to one of these locations. I mean, wetlands is a very generic kind of area name, right? So is arid, as was one of the other ones. They all seem like they're placeholder and they've got loose ideas, but I doubt we'll find true content be in those locations for a long time. And there's the question of, do we even want that? On a much more sort of core and realistic level, you can ask, hey, is this expansion purely going to be on Tyria as we know it, or are we actually going to go to QandA and Elona and so forth, as many of us before now would always have thought the first expansion would take us to, right? We all would have thought, hey, yeah, we'll probably go to one of these other continents, just like Guild Wars 1 did. But is that a good move? I think ultimately it's really a question of flavor, right? Whether we're on the same continent, whether they expand the map to include all this other stuff or not. I have always been a player, I will admit, that was annoyed when you have the in-game world map, and I care about it less now that I've grown up a bit more and that I appreciate it doesn't mean very much for game mechanics, but I have always been a player that was irked by opening the world map and seeing all these areas that you couldn't travel to, you know, like this thin slice of land you can see on your world map between Sparkfly Fen and Timberline Falls, for example. These things are all over the place, and I would love ArenaNet to drop some kind of big expansion that says, hey, yeah, look at all these massive regions, boom, we're putting them in the game straight away. Ultimately, I think they don't need to go beyond the boundaries of the map we can currently see. Think about the amount of regions that are already available. They could double the size of the game world and still be within the current boundaries. And ultimately, what matters is that we have interesting maps to travel to and new places to explore, and it doesn't matter really how far in the game universe away from our current location they really are, does it? I'll talk more specifically about the exact regions I think they're going to add in a future question, but absolutely my answer is I think we're going to stay on Tyria, and even though it's a bit shocking to me, I am not actually that sad about that fact. The next question is from Hummingbird Sound, who says, what if E was the Massart we see in the video? Speculated Massart, but very likely to be a Massart, yes. In some way, he could be an illusionist in disguise who fears that the dragons will preclude the rise of his race again, or something like that. Someone else also asked me about E. This was Colin Gleason, who said, I was so going to ask you about E and mention how we never found out who he was in Season 2. So now I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this subject? Do you have any more theories on who E is? It would be very interesting if E was this Massart. However, if this does turn out to be a Massart, one of this ancient race, I think it has to be Lazarus the Dire, right? This Massart that we got to know in Guild Wars 1 swore revenge on countless generations and vowed that he'd bring the Massart back. And I think he's going to be more of a villain than anything else. I do think E, on the other hand, does seem like an ally to us. It would be pretty crazy for him to turn out and not be an ally, but absolutely I think E is on our side, and Lazarus, the Massart, probably won't be unless we get in a weird situation where it's like the enemy of my enemy, the Elder Dragons, is now my friend by proxy. For what it's worth, I think the general Messart story they're doing, looking at the hints that they gave when the Silver Wastes were added and NPC dialogue was added around this mysterious surrogate at the bandit fort, and people say, wow, this seems to lead somewhere impossible. Given the history of the Messart and the fact that last time the Elder Dragons awoke, many of them fled, slipped out of phase with this reality and disappeared, I believe the setup is all the Messart that then did return to Tyria after the dragons fell asleep again were wiped out by us in Guild Wars 1, but there's still tons of them out there in the mists. And Lazarus's plan, Lazarus is trying to open a conduit and bring them back and allow them to step back on Tyria and claim the land once again, even though he's doing it in the middle of an Elder Dragon rising. In particular, the rising of an Elder Dragon where his people's civilization once was. Back to the E idea and Colin's question in particular, I think one of my favorite theories about who E is the idea that E is Avinia. Avinia is one of these little stories that I have always been annoyed that seem to have been dropped. But in Guild Wars 1, after everything was said and done, all the expansions had come out, and most of the community was just waiting for Guild Wars 2. People were crying that the game was vaporware, that it would never come out. People in general weren't interested in playing the original. At this point, they started doing updates again. And during these updates, known as the War in Kryta in particular, we had a setup of a powerful Krytan woman who was one of the 3 leaders of the Shining Blade. The Shining Blade now defend Queen Jenna in her palace. But back in Guild Wars 1, they were a small faction of guerrilla warriors who had only just reinstated royalty to the throne. And anyway, there were originally 3 leaders of them. 2 of them died. Avinia was the only one left, the final leader of the Shining Blade. And what happened? In the middle of the story, in the middle of the War in Kryta, she disappeared. ArenaNet wrote her out of the story. She just vanished, went missing in Ascalon, and she has never been touched again. And of course, her name begins with E. And this might seem completely unrelated. What are you talking about, the Shining Blade? Why has this got anything to do with E? This is a character from 250 years ago, Wooden Potatoes. What are you talking about? Well, in tandem to this, we also have the story of a Shining Blade necromancer named Livia, who was seen specifically in the final cutscene of Guild Wars 1 when they were hinting at all sorts of things about Guild Wars 2, the birth of the Pale Tree, and all these exciting things that have ended up meaning something. One shot they showed in this Guild Wars 1 trailer, teasing at future stories, was Livia, a member of the Shining Blade, finding the Scepter of Ore, this powerful necromantic weapon, possibly tied to Zaitan, that could turn people into liches, perhaps, or, you know, could bless people with incredible powers and potentially long life. And so people always wondered, hey, did Livia always have this scepter? What was going on? Did she always have the Scepter of Ore? But the devs have always said for years now in interviews that Livia never kept the Scepter of Ore. She gave it away. She only had it for a short period of time. And so to bring this all the way back around to E, the theory would be that Livia gave the Scepter of Ore to Avinia, and this was maybe she found her after she had gone missing, and Avinia is still around through the power of this scepter, and over the past 250 years, in the background, she has continued to manipulate things and be a force for good, and, you know, it's sort of like the ultimate Shining Blade leader, crazy character that is in the background even of the Shining Blade. So very exciting thoughts. And could even tie into ideas of a niece who could be Avinia, that's, you know, she's just transformed herself because she's become a powerful mesmer, and all kinds of nonsense. Anyway, that's a cool idea with E. It's either that or it's that weird hairy guy we saw randomly appear in one of the missions this season. So moving on to the next question, more of just a statement, I guess, that I really agree with, wanted to throw out there to you guys. It's an exciting one. In the Desert Rain says, you could get a blindfold for your character back in Guild Wars 1's Flame Legion Homelands, which was the northeastern part of Tyria. It makes sense that the rune on the blindfold, which we've seen come out in the community, would be Char, and so the blindfold would be Char made, so Ritlock related perhaps. Could it also mean that in the expansion we will get new zones in the northern part of Tyria? That would be so great. So, yeah, I think this is a good idea. Maybe we will get this blindfold. I think it's more likely this will just be added in the gem store at some point. But we come back to this idea of what will be added in the expansion. Now, what you want to remember, again, is even though it seems small in scope right now, and it seems like, oh, we'll just go to the Maguma jungle, deeper into the jungle for the expansion, it's likely there'll be a lot more. If this is anything comparable to the initial release of Guild Wars 2, which I would argue it has to be to keep people enthused and interested, we're going to be looking at a lot more regions. Northern Ascalon areas, aren't necessarily totally off the table. The whole story doesn't have to be, you know, some direct straight line march into Morgemoth's mouth where we stab him with a spear, hit his brain, and then everybody has a happy dance at the end. There could be a lot of twists and turns. We could find that the Char, now that the pact has fallen, that the Char are set back, and we send ourselves out as ambassadors to outreach to the Blood Legion Char, who are, what do you know, in Northern Ascalon. Maybe the expansion will do bizarre things where, once again, the story splits based on race. All of our personal stories had different racial components to them. Are they going to bring that back? And if they do, then perhaps, yeah, the Char characters could be exploring further north. And yeah, maybe this blindfold stuff would fit in there too. Don't forget that they did show Morgemoth's reach has extended as far as just south of the Blood Legion homelands, right? So maybe that was a small setup that they were doing. Maybe this is ArenaNet making it seem not so jarring when this expansion comes out. They say, oh yeah, the Blood Legion Char are threatened, so we're going to go help them out as Iron Legion Char, and then we're going to team up and we're going to go fight Morgemoth, and that's going to be like one of the mini arcs in this expansion. And so they set up in Season 2 that Morgemoth can actually go that far away, so it doesn't seem, you know, stupid and gimmicky. Other areas that I would consider to be highly likely for us to visit would be the Crystal Desert. Again, because there was so much stuff in the story recently about the idea of Ascension. If the Massart are coming back into the story however they may, we're going to want to become Ascended. We're going to want to learn more about those ancient races and the Forgotten. With the destruction of the Pact, who exactly will stand up where? Where do we find the power to fight Morgemoth? I believe we will be looking to the ancient races for that power. And the Crystal Desert would be a huge thing for that. It's something people have wanted in the game for a long time. If we're getting to the Crystal Desert too, which I think is crazy likely, the Crystal Desert adjoins to Ore pretty comfortably through another region called the Scavenger's Causeway. Are we gonna do it that way? Are we gonna just sort of sail to the Crystal Desert like we did in the first game, or are we actually going to walk there? Are we gonna see some new Orion maps and then move into the Scavenger's Causeway? And maybe the things we saw at the very end of the personal story where Ore was cleansed and all these plants went everywhere, very Morgemothy, maybe we'll actually see that progress a little bit, and the Scavenger's Causeway, Crystal Desert will become explorable areas. Again, it all depends on how much space ArenaNet want to fill, how much scope this proposed expansion really has. The Maguma jungle would be a given. The Isles of Janthir, again, the idea of the Massart. The Massart aren't originally from the Maguma jungle. Yes, they seem to have had civilizations there at some point, but they were said to have come from the Isles of Janthir. This was the heart of their civilization. These are islands far to the north. Does this mean we get to go back to the Verdant Cascades and travel north of Divinity's Reach? What about the Fire Island chain? There's still some cause to go there. We still don't know how Ritlock got Sahothin his fiery sword from the Fire Island chain. And there was heavy Massart presence and Seer presence on the Fire Island chain. These are, again, easy reasons for us to maybe be able to go there in this expansion. And that's exciting to me. The last little region I think may be a thing is the Fissure of Woe, because I do believe that whatever product they're going to release is going to have something for hardcore audiences, and I think there is enough setup. There's a Temple of Balthazar, someone mentioned to me just today, in the Maguma jungle, which I'd totally forgotten about. You know, we could push into the Maguma jungle and we could end up going to the Fissure of Woe. This could be some kind of raid. They did the raiding CDI, and that could be another area of the mist and permanent staple part of the game that I think would excite a lot of people and could be something ArenaNet do. Richard Engroff asked, WP, you mentioned not having any Living World story until the expansion. Do you believe you must have the expansion to continue the Living World story? In my opinion, this would be bad, as many may not have the resources for the expansion and ruin the game. Look, what you got to consider is the way ArenaNet is structured, okay, is they've been working on this expansion for a long time already. Just because now it's been announced doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're pulling the Living World people away to go work on it. I mean, they might do that. They might feel like they're about to hit crunch and then end up doing that. But they've already been split, and everything you've seen that the Living World has produced so far has been in tandem with a load of stuff going on in the background to produce this huge thing for us. And so I don't really see the logic behind this argument. I just think the Living World team will continue to exist, and they'll provide us alternate updates, as I've explained already, stuff like Super Adventure Box and more fractals and things, rather than pushing the story on directly. The only other choice is to do like kind of tertiary stories and side stories and things that sort of talk about the Morgemoth things going on in the destruction of the Pact, but don't really push things in a good direction. And that, I think, would be a mistake, because then that's going to stagnate the narrative, and a lot of people already feel like it stagnates a lot, given that, you know, sometimes we have to wait quite a long time for the next update to come out if you want to do it really regularly. If you want to play Guild Wars 2 like a TV show, they're not quite there already, and then to have essentially a whole season of filler is what we're talking about would be a bad idea, in my opinion. Johnson5 said, hey WP, am I the only one who would be disappointed with a generic Kill the Big Bad Dragon expansion? I think that the really interesting story is with the other races turning on the Sylvari. Cool idea is that you can start as Kaith with the egg, but where do you go? Would love the idea that she'd hide in the Dominion of Winds to escape other players and dragon minions. This could give us a chance to play as the Tengu as well. Lion's Arch could be rebuilt by another pact who are all out for the Sylvari. Then some resolution could be found and we finally go after the dragon. Yeah, I mean, you just demonstrated so easily how they can set this up to go in multiple directions. Again, another thing that I would always have expected from some kind of the first expansion Guild Wars 2 is another race, and I've always put the Tengu as the most likely new race to be added to the game. So yeah, we may end up seeing the Dominion of Winds. That's another perfect region that they could add. And yeah, sure, the Sylvari go there to hide from everyone else because the Tengu for some reason take pity on them because they've been quite close to each other for a while proximity-wise. I don't know. They could do anything like that. I think all you're doing right here is demonstrating the amount of directions they can go in. You have to remember, it's like I said earlier, it's not a straight march into Morgemoth, and that's it. There is a lot more to be excited about, and hopefully this 1.5 hour panel will talk about that. Next question is from Sheena Malfoy, who says, what do you think happened to Trahearne? He isn't showed after the airships got attacked. Do you think he died, like I wanted, or is he alive somewhere, spared his sanity like Kanak? Seriously, how did Kanak stay sane and everyone else turn? My favourite thought right now is that he spared his mind, but as a result of wielding Khalidbolg, a weapon created from the Pale Tree, and thus Morgemoth, his body is possessed and he is forced into servitude. Us as players will get to fight him either as a dragon champion or more simply as a sad but important free Trahearne mini-story. Absolutely, this is my favourite idea too. I do not think Trahearne is dead. Trahearne is no more dead than Logan, Air or Zodja are, okay? They're all sort of in the same position, but Trahearne is a Sylvari. I think a really cool climax to the whole Morgemoth arc is that, yeah, you know, the previous commander of the pact, the most instrumental character in the universe to have orchestrated the destruction of Zhaitan, and don't anybody dare say that it was you, the player character, you who just went out on a few missions, you who did none of the organization or set up or brought so many peoples together and actually waged war. This character, Trahearne, who brought down Zhaitan, gets corrupted by another of the Elder Dragons, and he is now commanding for that Elder Dragon. And now we are fighting him. That would be very cool. Perhaps a little cliche in some minds, but I think that would be really, really awesome. And if their excuse for why this happens has something to do with the fact he's wielding Khalidbolg, fine. Khalidbolg could even then have some even more shocking twists in the story. What if then we pry Khalidbolg from Trahearne's dead hands and then use it to slay Morgemoth? Who knows, right? Very, very exciting. Victor Jimenez says, hey WP, do you think the devs might do anything to underwater combat now that they're releasing the expansion, or do you think they will leave it as is, maybe even get rid of it in the future? I don't think they're going to get rid of it. I think there will continue to be underwater areas in new zones that they add, but there will be little focus on it. It would be nice for them to say, oh, there's going to be this big change to underwater content, but I really don't know what they could do short of a complete revamp and change of their understanding of how it should work. But they've always said, look, they just want it to be a free part of the game. They don't want stuff like breath meters. I don't think the engine is really capable of creating air pockets underwater, and I don't know whether an expansion would come with it. Big engine changes, that's a whole other topic we could get into. So I think they'll probably just add a couple more weapons for choices for people. If the underwater weapons are becoming terrestrial weapons, as we've seen people using spears above land, maybe a couple of the above land weapons will become available underwater. Maybe we'll get a new trait line somehow that influences purely underwater stuff and has its own points. I don't know. Really, the biggest problem for me with underwater combat in Guild Wars 2 is how it doesn't tie almost at all into the dynamics of the rest of the game and the build craft of your character, only sort of very loosely, and that's what makes it suck for me. But I don't expect a big change. I wouldn't even advocate they spend resources on a big change on that over other things, many other things. And lastly is another common question, another thing on many people's minds. Adam for Fun, who says, what is the likelihood of new legendaries being added? I have been putting off crafting my legendary, the Meteorologicus or Sunrise, as I've used Black Lion skins. Thanks for any input. I think, yes, we will be seeing new legendaries. I would hope we would see like a tier 2 of legendaries. You have to consider there's a lot of people out there who have been playing the credit card farm for a long time, or have been playing the TP for a really long time with tens of thousands of gold, and any new generation of legendaries they add, if they are as easy to acquire as the current ones, you'll just see them flood everywhere, and it won't actually add that much excitement to the game. I want Guild Wars 2 to go back to a position where there are hardcore goals to go for, and you really do feel like a special snowflake because you have the Incinerator 2.0 2.0, and no one else does for months and months and months and months. I want to see Guild Wars 2 go back to that. I talked well over a year ago now about the idea of using existing legendaries as precursors and stuff like that. I want hardcore, difficult legendaries, and maybe they will do that. Maybe they would decide that actually all new legendaries they add are going to be about on par with the current ones, which would disappoint me, but probably keep a lot more of the casual people happy. And the other choice is that they just start adding new types of legendary gear, like legendary back pieces, for example. And these can now be very, very, very difficult to acquire because no precedent has already been set in the economy, right? Or legendary armor. Legendary armor, for what it's worth, I don't believe will allow you to swap stats whenever you like, because that would just be ridiculously overpowered and unbelievable. I think rather legendary armor would have some small perk like, hey, you this will never break. You never have to go to a repair anvil ever again for as long as you're wearing the set. Stuff like that. But yeah, I would expect 100% something hardcore item-wise to go for. Definitely. Like, I'm 99% sure. And that's pretty much it, guys. So thanks very much for listening to the Q&A on Heart of Thorns. If you have any questions specifically about the X-Pack, drop them down below. We will continue doing these. There is so much to talk about. I may crank one more out before all this crazy information drops on Saturday. We shall see. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you agreed with some of the stuff I said, or maybe I've missed something big. And I guess I will see you tomorrow for some more speculation stuff. Have a great evening, guys.